respond to the poll on your screen so we can get a better understanding of who is in our audience today. Please indicate which entity you represent for today's webinar: a healthcare facility, a CHC hospital, a local or federal government, academic institution, social service or community-based organization, or other. Okay, thank you all for responding. According to the results, it looks like many are from healthcare facilities, as well as social service or community-based organizations, and other types of organizations. Well, on behalf of HEP United, I wanted to thank you for joining us for today's HEP United Speakers Bureau Media Training. We're excited to present you with today's webinar about media tools and tips to bring visibility to the work you do to increase hepatitis B awareness, screening, vaccination, and linkage to care. Joining us as your presenters today are Stacy Lavilla, APJO's Director of Communications, and Beverly Quintana, APJO's Communications Assistant. Before we hand it over to our panelists, we wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's webinar. Here we are looking at an example of the GoToWebinar attendee interface, which is made up of two parts. The viewer window, shown here on the right, but it may be on the left on your screen depending on your browser or computer operating system. This allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen. The control panel, shown here on the left, but may be on the right on your screen, allows you to participate in the webinar. By clicking on the orange arrow button, you can hide or show your control panel. You can also set the control panel to auto-hide or not to auto-hide by going to the View menu. Please note that all attendees are in listen-only mode and will be muted during the presentation. After the presentation, we'll be holding a Q&A session. And to participate, you can click the blue Raise Hand button shown here on your control panel. Please note that questions will be answered in the order they are received. And alternatively, you may also submit questions in writing during the presentations by typing them in the questions field. We'll be reviewing them as they come in and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Today's webinar is being recorded and you'll receive an email with training materials attached and a link to view a recording of today's presentation after the webinar. Before I pass the meeting over to Stacy and Bev, I wanted to quickly tell you a little bit about HEP United and its Speakers Bureau. HEP United is a national coalition to address the public health challenge of hepatitis B, the leading cause of liver cancer and a major health disparity among Asian Americans. Our goal is to support and leverage the success of local community coalitions across the United States to increase hepatitis B awareness, screening, vaccination, and linkage to care for all Americans, but in particular for high-risk Asian and Pacific Islander populations who are disproportionately affected. The HEP United Speakers Bureau will play an essential role in informing Asian and Pacific Islander communities about the importance of getting screened, or treated for hepatitis B by engaging with local ethnic media. Through interviews and various media outlets, spokespeople will have the opportunity to share the events and activities of your local hepatitis B coalition, also HEP United's efforts as a national coalition, and CDC's No Hepatitis B campaign, which is co-branded with HEP United and is the first ever multilingual campaign to increase testing for hepatitis B among Asian and Pacific Islanders in the United States. The purpose of this training is to provide tools, resources, and information to support successful media engagement. And with that, I'll pass the presentation to Stacy, APCHO's Director of Communications.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Stacy Lavilla. I'm the Director of Communications here at APCHO, and I wanted to say welcome and thank you for participating. When Beverly Quintana, who's the Communications Assistant, and I were invited to do this, we were more than honored to do so, so thank you for joining us. So with this first slide, or actually before I start, I wanted to say that we really didn't want to make this a generic media presentation that you could just pull from online. We wanted this to be a presentation that was really tailored to your needs. So we could have covered a lot of ground and territory here, but we've really narrowed the scope down to give you information that you would find useful in your work. Okay, so what we did was we did a very, very informal poll. And on this slide are the topics that folks were hankering for information on. And they were talking to reporters and how to do that, how to develop talking points, and if there are talking points out there that could be utilized readily, how to get an op-ed piece published. And as a bonus, because we think this is important, we threw in a component on social media, and Beverly will be presenting on that a little later in this presentation. And so if I step back and put this into a little bit of context, the overall goal of what we're trying to do here in this communications media work is to really raise awareness about hepatitis B and that it is a problem in AAPI communities. And there are a number of ways in which we can accomplish this, right? I mean, there's a straight up sort of education way where we can write a piece or write a white paper or write a brief on it. We can do so by educating our policymakers, and we can do so through the media. These are just a few ways that we can accomplish this. We are obviously focusing on the latter today. And so there will be many points throughout the year in which you'll have the opportunity to bring some attention and raise awareness on this topic. And what we're trying to do in this presentation is really make sure that before those opportunities arise, that you are feeling comfortable enough to take advantage of them by giving you some tips and tools to use in these efforts. And so before I get going on this first topic, we're going to do a quick poll, which you should see on your screen now, that asks which of the statements below most closely describes you or your organization. And if you could all complete that, we'd appreciate it. It gives us a little more information to work off of. Okay, so what we're seeing is that for most of you, you're a part of a team that handles your organization's communications. Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. All righty. So first topic on tap for us is talking to reporters. And I think for me, I can pretty much say that it's fairly universal that for most people, talking to reporters is kind of an anxiety-inducing activity. And I completely understand why. I mean, there can be anxiety over what the reporters might ask. There can be anxiety over whether or not you'll be able to answer all reporter questions correctly. There might be anxiety over whether something you're saying can be misconstrued, which can then lead to a story that you really didn't want to be put out there. So there are all kinds of reasons. But the single most important thing that I think you can do to feel comfortable when doing these reporter interviews is really to prepare. Know your stuff. Know what it is you're speaking of. This means you'll need to have a clear idea of what messages you want the reporter to walk away with. And this, in turn, will require you to really have to gather your information, your data, your facts, and get that all in order. Once this is done, you'll need to develop talking points, and I'll go through that in a couple of slides. And after those talking points are developed, and you know them inside and out, you'll need to speak with authority. You have to remember that you are the authority on the subject, and that's really who the the reporter sees you to be, whether you think you are or not. So know that you're the expert here. In addition to speaking with authority, you'll want to speak clearly. So you'll really need to make sure your talking points are clearly and simply written. And I also mentioned that you need to speak with energy. You don't need to give the reporter the impression that you're bouncing off the walls with energy, but you really want to be enthusiastic about what it is you're talking about. Bring life to your topic. If you seem excited about what you're speaking about, your listener is going to be interested in what you're saying. So that's important. And after you've done all the prep, created the talk points, and once the interview is about done and coming to a close, one of the other things I tell people is to really not forget to write down the reporter's name, the phone number, and email address that he or she can be contacted at. And ask them when it is they think the story might be running and when might be a good time to call or email to follow up on the story. My last bullet is about follow-up, and I have to say this is really, really important. Reporters and editors at papers are typically so strapped for time, and they're operating on constantly tight deadlines that they really almost never send you an unsolicited email or issue a phone call to let you know that the story ran. The onus is really on you to call and email to find out if and when that story ran. Definitely see if you can get a link or a copy of that story. And if the reporter says to you that it hasn't run, you should know that you can ask, when, if it hasn't run, they'll plan to write that story. And if it seems like the reporter, like maybe their interest has waned, it's also fair for you to ask what it is that you can do on your side to actually help to move that story forward. Is it talking to another person in the field? Do they need more statistics? You can always help to move that along if possible, and you should know that. Okay, so this slide is about developing your talking points, and there are a handful of things that I would like you to keep in mind. As you're starting, you really want to simplify your issue into key elements. It's really good to think about it in this way, and it's going to help you, if you're sorting it all out, it'll help you to talk about it and write about it in a way that's much easier for your audience to understand. The next thing you'll want to do is state what the problem is. And for us here, right, the problem is that hepatitis B is an issue among AAPI communities. You'll want to give evidence of that problem, and this is where your statistics and data come into play. You'll want to identify key players, and when we say that, it could be multiple players. On the topic we're talking about here, it could be patients. It could be healthcare providers, it could be policymakers, it could be the general public. And you'll need to know who needs to do what and why. The last thing here is that you will also want to state your solution. This is your ask, essentially. And so what you'll want to be thinking about here is what has been done, what needs to be done right now, what is timing for the action that you're asking for, what happens if we don't do anything, and how effective is that action going to be? The next bullet item is about impact, and this is really something that I would encourage you to spend a good amount of time thinking about before you do your talking points. You'll want to be able to state how the issue impacts everyone else. How does it impact your larger audience? This is where you're telling your audience and the reporter why they should even care about this. Why does it matter? Why do they need to write about it? Next, you'll want to place your information into context. This is also important. You don't want to issue your statistics or information in a vacuum. You can't just say, for example, that 1 in 10 foreign-born Asians and Pacific Islanders has chronic B. Why? Because we don't know what that means, essentially. You need to place that statistic in the larger picture of other populations. So instead of saying just 1 in 10 foreign-born Asians and Pacific Islanders has chronic hepatitis B, what you'll want to say is that that is compared to the 1 in 1,000 Caucasian Americans that have chronic hepatitis B. This is important because it helps the person understand the depth and breadth of the problem. So I stress that context is something that The last issue with respect to talking points and developing them is to really localize your statistics if you can. And if you don't have those statistics, to be sure that you have anecdotes or stories ready. This is key as the responsibility of, the newspaper, the TV station, the radio station. Their task is really to cover what's happening in the local community. So it is your responsibility to provide them with this perspective. And really, this is part of the overall message we're making, that we have the issue of hepatitis B nationally, and it really is impacting us locally, and this is how. Okay, so I have just a few points on this last slide about talking points, tips that I'd like you to consider. First is, again, I can't stress the importance of knowing your talking points and knowing them well. As you're developing them, I'd also like you to consider to actually place yourself in the reporter's shoes and play devil's advocate. And this really goes back to my whole point about being prepared and making you feel comfortable going into the interview. If you do this little exercise of anticipating counter arguments and questions to the points you're trying to make, you're going to be better prepared. So I suggest that you put some thought into that, craft answers, and have them at the ready. One last thing I also wanted to say on questions is, if you don't ever know the answer to reporters' questions, don't try to fake that. You should just be honest and say that you don't know the answer to it. What you can say, and this is completely fair, is that, I don't know the answer to that question, but if you give me a little bit of time, I can get the answer for you, and I can email you and call you back with that information. Reporters expect that. Next bullet is, I wanted to state that, you can have your talking points on hand during the phone interview for reference. I think it might help in terms of, making you feel comfortable in case you're worried about forgetting your talking points. That is a good recommendation. And the last thing that I wanted to state, and this is pretty important, is that you shouldn't ever be reading from your talking points. So reporters can tell when you're doing this. And they can do so because typically I think when someone's reading off a piece of paper, that person's voice tends to enter into a different register, and it can sound monotone, it can sound monotonous, there's little emphasis or inflection in a person's voice. So, it's not if you're reading from a paper, it's often hard to disguise that. So what reporters want really is to feel that they're having a conversation with you on a given topic. They don't want to feel like you're reading from a script. And so if anything, I prefer that you more or less memorize your points where you know them well. But remember, when you are talking to the reporter, to make it really sound like you're conversing with a friend and you're trying to explain hepatitis B to them. Okay, on this last slide about talking points, we were asked to let all of you know if there were some that were ready-made that already existed. And so I've pointed to a few sets here. The first set of talking points comes from a publication that APSA developed called BB Activated Hepatitis B Policy Advocacy and Media Outreach Toolkit. If you go to the Hepatitis B Talking Points to Share with Media, there you will find points that were already crafted and that you could utilize. I would suggest reviewing them, using them, but also really rounding them out with information that pertains to your local community or patient base, etc. The toolkit is really a great overall media resource. You'll be able to find much more information on topics related to media than we're able to provide you with here. And it's also a really good resource if any of you are doing policy work. It's a good resource to get your hands on. And I'm not just saying that because I had a hand in developing that. Okay, the next topic that we'll be discussing is about op-eds. So what is an op-ed, and how do we get them published? So the term op-ed means opposite the editorial page, and it's called that because these types of pieces typically appear in a newspaper opposite what is considered the paper's editorial page. what is it? It's a written opinion or point of view that's held by a person or organization on a topic of public interest, and that's pretty much it. They commonly offer a recommended solution to a problem. They are not really objective pieces. They don't offer two sides or all sides on an issue, so they're different from a news story in that way. And usually they're about 600 to 900 words long. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what the benefits are in writing the op-ed piece. The first is, it seems obvious, but you are really bringing attention to an issue. You're bringing attention to your organization, and in writing an op-ed, you are establishing yourself and your organization as an expert on this topic. The second bullet item here is about control, and that's also a big benefit. You are the person that is allowed to communicate the opinion or point of view that you want out there. And this is different from a news piece where you have almost zero control of the story that's being written. The other issue is that you have more control over the timing of publication in a way. So if you know, for example, that there is an important piece of legislation that will be voted on during the year, you can try to calendar it out and see, make sure that your op-ed piece, work with the paper to make sure that your op-ed piece appears with enough time on hand for, policymakers to read it and to somehow do the research and figure out their opinion on it. And you can give time to people who are in your local district who care about this issue, who can go in and influence that policymaker as well. And before I continue, I'm sorry, we wanted to do a second poll here that asks which of the statements below most closely describes you, and it's asking pretty much about your experience in writing op-eds. So if you could do that, that would be great. Okay, so we see that more than half have no experience in crafting op-eds, but there are some of you that have actually helped write them. So, okay. All righty, that is helpful as well. Thank you. Okay, so I've gone over the benefits of doing an op-ed piece. Seems pretty easy, right? You write it and then you just submit it and then you'll get it printed. Unfortunately, Netley, that isn't exactly the case. So I'm going to give some tips right now in terms of, how you might get your piece published. And the first thing you really need to do is you need to know which media outlets you want to target for your piece. And part of knowing this is knowing who it is you want to influence in your piece. So who is your target reader audience, and also what do you want them to do? If you want a bill influence, for example, you'll probably want to target a local mainstream paper that is being read by your local policymakers and their staff. Essentially, we're trying to target a publication that is read by the people who can take action on an issue, and that might be policymakers, as well as others who can exert influence, which perhaps might be the general public. So again, the key is that we need to know what the people you're trying to influence are reading, and then go ahead and target that publication. Other things you need to do here and figure out are, you need to know outlet guidelines. You need to know what the paper's deadlines are. Do they publish daily? Do they publish weekly? Is it monthly? And this is actually important for you to know because it'll help to determine what deadlines you're going to be operating under. You'll also want to find out who the editor is of the op-ed page. So you'll want to know, which person can I pitch my piece to? And it's better to just know who that contact is directly instead of, having it be passed on before, by 5 people before the appropriate person gets it. Also, in addition to getting this information, you'll want to ask about word counts and how they typically like to receive pieces. Usually it's by email, but it's good still just to ask. Okay, the next big factor in determining whether your piece runs or not in a paper is really about the timeliness of it. And this is really key. So what this requires of you, though, however, is that you're reading the news and you're reading what your target papers are writing about. You're also going to want to make sure that you have an ear to the ground with respect to upcoming events and laws being considered. What is an example of what makes an issue timely? Well, dates on the calendar related to hepatitis B are one place to start. So, for example, National Hepatitis Testing Day or World Hepatitis Day, those both present opportunities that would make an op-ed timely. Another thing to consider is, do you know of upcoming meetings or big conferences? Those would typically suffice. Local events often work as well. So if someone is hosting a health fair and there is a Hep B testing booth there or an education booth in your community, that is something that you could, hook your op-ed to. And also, the other thing is there local legislation that is being considered and when? That's also important. Lastly, I just want to say here that, you don't have to wait exactly for there to be some coverage on hepatitis B and things related to hepatitis B in order for your op-ed to be timely. If something is happening, for example, in a related field, or not field, but like on a topic like liver cancer, that would also provide an opportunity for you to talk about hepatitis B. And for instance, I'll give you an example also of, one of the dates that we look out for here when we're looking to pitch pieces or pitch op-ed pieces. That comes in May, and that is AAPI Heritage Month. And we typically try to target and get an op-ed piece on any related or any given health issue that affects the API community. I believe we've done one on hepatitis B in the past. All righty, so this is my last op-ed slide, and I'm just going to close this out with a few pointers. First thing is a point about exclusivity. Papers want to know that they are the only ones that are running a piece. And they will not be happy if a competitor is also, if they find out that a competitor, you talked to a competitor about running your op-ed piece. So don't pitch or propose the piece to multiple papers. You need to be able to promise exclusivity and say, you're the only ones that have got this. If you do that, your chances are going to be better. The second is to offer a fresh point of view. And again, you'll sort of need to be reading the papers and seeing what folks are saying on this topic. If you are offering a point of view that hasn't really been said before, your chances will be greater. I'm not saying that you have to stretch and find a fresh point of view, but keep that in mind when you're writing, because that'll make your chances better. Next point, your op-ed must be written clearly and succinctly. You shouldn't have to work to understand. Your reader shouldn't have to work to understand what it is that he or she is reading. Your piece should be simply written in a language that can be easily understood. So what that means is you'll need to avoid acronyms if you can. Terms that are not understood by the layperson. Avoid jargon. Your piece should pretty much be ready to print and require little to no editing. And this is important. And I say this because as someone who has actually sat on the other side and had to make decisions about op-ed pieces that were going to be run, if I had to work to try and figure out what you were saying, that would almost immediately go in my no pile because you get a lot of submissions in. Your time is limited, so you're really the editor's going to want to go with a piece that is pretty much ready to go. And so my recommendation here, because you might be wondering, okay, so what can I do about this? How can I address this issue? Is really to have other people read your piece before you submit it. It's good to get at least a couple of pairs of eyes on it because normally you want people with different knowledge bases. That helps in terms of addressing a more diverse audience. And also, the other thing is to write within word limits that you're given. Do not write beyond that. If your piece falls outside of the word limit, the editor has to revise it at all to reduce the piece down. That also does not do well for your chances to get a piece in. Okay, and the last two bullets, I think this next one's a little obvious, but you want to make sure that your stats and your data are accurate. If your information is inaccurate, you and your organization immediately lose credibility, and that is not what you want to happen. So really go through whatever it is that you've written in the way of an op-ed or talking points and make sure that, you know, your stats are pretty much set. And lastly, again, follow up. As with the newspaper piece, you'll need to ask the editor when he or she thinks the piece is going to get run or when they anticipate it getting run. If it hasn't run again on the date that they gave you, call back. Feel free to ask why and when they might think it might run. And if, again, you know, as with the newspaper piece, if it looks like maybe their interest is waning, feel free to ask if there is anything you can do to refresh the piece or maybe write a different or new op-ed. There might be something that they're looking for there. And that is it for me and closes out my segment of this presentation.
Thank you, Stacy. Again, if you have any questions, do feel free to type them in the question field, or you can also wait and use the raise hand button on your control panel. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Beverly Tintana, APJO's Communication Assistant, and she'll be providing a quick overview of social media.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. As Michelle mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit about social media and how, in addition to the tools Stacy went over, it can help to increase awareness about the impact of hepatitis C in our communities. So to start things off, we can just go into another quick poll to get a feel of everyone's experience with social media. If you can take a look at your screen and select one of the 4 choices. So which of these statements below most closely describes you? I use or have used social media for my personal use. I use or have used social media for my organization. I use or have used social media for both, or I have never used social media. So if you could take a few seconds to make a selection there. All right, so looking at the results, it looks like mostly everyone has definitely been using social media, and actually the majority of the group today have used social media for both their personal use and their organization. So that just goes to show you how prevalent the use of social media is, and when it was just not even existent a few years ago. So thank you for responding to that. So just an overview of what I'll be going through in the next few slides. I'll provide a quick summary of what social media is and what it's used for. I'll talk a little bit about the impact of social media and why your organization should consider or continue to use it. And lastly, I'll share some strategies and tools to help you kick off or continue to coordinate your organization's social media efforts. So what is social media? Well, it seems like a lot of you are already familiar with it, but to quickly summarize, social media has been defined by some as a group of internet-based applications that allow the creation and exchange of user-generated content. Or to put it in less fancy terms, social media is really about people and the many conversations they have online. Through platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, social media encourages interaction and the sharing of information and ideas. And from that, social media is about community building and raising awareness. Social media links groups of people together around common issues. For example, there are Facebook pages ranging from public health issues and policy advocacy to pages solely just for dog lovers or foodies. Everything you can think about, there's probably a Facebook page or other social media community out there for it. And so for your organization, having an online presence helps promote what it is that you do and how you do it. Through your messaging, photos, and resources, your constituents and supporters have direct access to you. And today, people really rely and trust friend-to-friend or peer interviews, which can work to your benefit when something from your organization goes viral or is shared widely throughout social media. So again, to recap, social media is about people, conversations, and community building. What is social media not, or just a few misconceptions about social media? social media should not be a standalone aspect or the end goal of your communication strategy. It should be used in tandem with other traditional communication vehicles like your website and media relation activities like those that Stacey went over earlier. Social media is also not a one-way conversation. Social media is not just about posting something about your organization. It's also about listening to your constituents and ongoing engagement. Lastly, while social media is simple, it is not easy, and by that I mean social media is usually user-friendly, but it does require planning and resources like time and people. So why use social media in the first place? In just a few years, social media has dramatically changed the way we communicate and has become a part of our daily lives. The number of people who use social media continues to grow rapidly. For example, as of last year, Facebook reported that it had 1.19 billion monthly active users, and Twitter reported that it had 218 million monthly active users. According to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, 73% of U.S. adults use social media. So that was kind of along the lines of our poll earlier too. Not only does social media have a high number of users, but it also garners high levels of engagement. As you see on the graph to the right there, for example, 63% of Facebook users visit the site daily. A few more facts. Another study also showed that people spend as much as 17% of their time on the computer on Facebook, which is currently ranked top among social media platforms. And probably most relevant for us today is that another study has shown that Asian Americans are likely to take action, like liking or sharing posts after they see it on social media. If you take a look at the infographic to the right, it shows that the Asian American community has the highest percentage as compared with the Hispanic or white or African American communities to take action after they see something on social media. So that's something for us to think about, especially when we reach out to AAPI communities. Okay, so aside from the numbers, why else should you use social media or continue to use it? Well, social media is a pretty cost-effective way to engage supporters, connect with them, especially for community-based organizations that may have limited funding or other resources. And here are just a few benefits social media can offer. So maintain relationships with your target audiences. You can collaborate with your other partner orgs, which Happy United has done frequently in the past and pretty recently. We've done Facebook challenges and have worked with our local coalition partners. And also we've done recent chats with the CDC about the No Hepatitis B campaign. You can also increase attendees for your events by promoting them on social media. You can recruit new supporters and like donors or volunteers. You can share your organization's successes. And in general, you can establish your organization's authority in your field and what kind of work that you do. And lastly, if your organization has resources on your website, you can drive traffic to those as well. So to share some strategies and tools, if you Google social media strategy, you'll probably come up with tons of guidelines and resources to help you. But since we have a limited time, I just wanted to narrow down to these 3 elements that every social media strategy should have. So the first one is know your audience, and this is a common trend in any form of communication, including social media. For example, if the target population you're trying to reach are adults ages 18 and up, then social media is the perfect vehicle for you, since earlier I mentioned 73% of U.S. adults have been shown to use social media. The second is showing is greater than telling. Photos and other visuals have been shown to get higher levels of engagement on social media. So on this infographic, this shows that 53% more likes, or photos get 53% more likes, over 100 more comments, and 84% more click-throughs. So those are pretty high statistics for visuals and photos. If you're trying to raise awareness about a certain issue, like the high rates of perinatal transmission in the API communities, consider sharing an infographic to communicate the stats that you want to get across. And finally, the third element of an effective social media strategy is to keep an editorial calendar. And this is to help you streamline and manage your social media efforts. It can help you anticipate messaging opportunities and also possibly schedule future posts ahead of time, which can free up some of your time for the other work that you most likely do. And just to close out, we wanted to share with you some handy social media tools. On the slide here, you'll see some tools that are helpful for analytics, so measuring the activity and the traffic on your social media channels. If you're managing multiple accounts, you can use Hootsuite or TweetDeck. I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with those tools as well. And for Twitter chats, handy tools could be Twib or TweetGrid. It helps you follow along chats very well in addition to just a normal Twitter page. And a few other resources. So Thunderclap can help you broaden your reach, and the other guides are from CDC, and they're very helpful if you're just starting out on social media. And we'll share this with you after the webinar as well. So throwing it back to Michelle.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Stacy, for all that great information. So we're eager to hear from those of you on the webinar if you have any questions. We'll begin the question and answer portion. So go ahead and please feel free to click the blue raise hand button as shown on your screen, and we'll unmute you in the order received. Or you can also submit questions by typing them into the questions field on your control panel. Okay, so our first question, can you give an example of a talking point?
Yes, I can. And what I'm going to do is, and it's great because, you know, we work in partnership with so many other organizations that we have access to talking points that are, again, readily available, which means that, you know, for all of you, you know, it's not exactly necessary to recreate the wheel. I mean, we have talking points that are ready to go. So one example that I will use right off of the No Hepatitis B campaign launch, which I believe was last June, in June of 2013, was, and it's very general, and it goes under the category about hepatitis B and APIs. So one of the primary talking points that this set of talking points wanted to get out there right away was it wanted to start with a stat, because the stat was very powerful, and that was hepatitis B affects 1.2 million people in the United States, including 1 in 12 AAPIs. Yet nearly 2 out of 3 people with hepatitis B don't know that they are infected because hepatitis B often has no symptoms. So again, it was a talking point that was written pretty clearly. It includes the stat and states the problem. It says, you know, it says it's 1 in 12 APIs, which is a relevant statistic to the population we're talking about. And it also gives some information that is kind of jarring, and that is that nearly 2 out of 3 people with hepatitis B don't know that they're infected because hepatitis B often has no symptoms. So that is an example of a talking point. And I'm not sure if you had any more questions about that, or
Thank you, Stacy. Does anyone else have any questions? And just a reminder that along with an email that has the link to the recording, there will also be training materials, which includes talking points about Hep B United, also the CDC No Hepatitis B campaign, and also some other points that might be helpful. Okay, well, I see that there are no other questions at this point. If you do find that you have questions afterwards, please feel free to go ahead and reach out. So also, you can follow up with us. Don't hesitate to contact us if you need any additional information. Stacy and Beverly have their contact information up there on the slide. You can also learn more about Hep B United and our members on our website at www.hepbunited.org or by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And lastly, I'd like to thank Stacy and Bev and Hep B United who made this presentation possible. Please, again, keep a lookout for an email from us, which will include the materials as well as a link to a short survey. And again, if you are a Hep B United spokesperson, you will be getting an email with regards to the upcoming process and how interviews will be handled. And if you are not signed up as a spokesperson and would like to be, please go ahead and feel free to email myself, m9@apcho.org, and we can go ahead and get you signed up. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.